Our first guest today, our first guest speaker today is Paul Dean. Paul is a Melbourne-based researcher who focuses on government and military involvement in the UFO phenomena, particularly where it applies to recent and notable Australian cases. He joined the VUFOA in November 13 and has been reviewing and investigating UFO cases with them ever since. He has studied the UFO issue in general for 23 years and corresponds regularly with a number of the world's leading researchers on the subject. There is very little that Paul doesn't know about this field. Paul has been instrumental in recent times in initiating the release from the National Archives of Australia of numerous previously unseen files through the Freedom of Information Act. His work in collecting, cataloguing and studying some 240,000 government documents ensures that he has become the best knowledge bank in Australia for official documents relating to the phenomena. Basically, he spends all of his free time annoying the hell out of the government, military and aviation authorities. If you ask him a question, be prepared to put half an hour aside for the answer. Paul Dean is a tenacious and intelligent researcher, as you will soon see. He has earned himself the nickname Pitbull, and I dare say that he has been called a lot worse than that inside the corridors of power, something that he would no doubt bring a smile to his face. Paul is a world-class investigator and would not be out of place at any forum on the subject in the world. So please welcome Paul Dean.
All right, here we go. I was going to say, hi, my name is Paul Dean and all that stuff, but he's done it for me. Can everyone hear up the back? Yeah, okay. I have been studying this matter all my life. I am a very, what you would call nuts and bolts researcher. I study mostly the core UFO phenomenon, so that's what we call solid or semi-solid reports of semi-solid craft, formations of such that appear on radar, multiple witnesses. I tend not to push the limits with the more fringe elements. I'm very, very comfortable staying with what is an already very, very difficult topic for people to accept. So anyway, today I'll be talking, I'll start off by talking about something that did test my abilities and my, how far I could think outside the box. I investigated a case last year which has really, really rocked me. And then I'll be talking about some more technical matters about pilots and about government agencies and about UFO reporting channels and cover-up and documents and investigative practices and the War Memorial and whatever else. But before I actually start, I want to make an announcement that will excite quite a few people. Bill Chalker will be one of them. Where's my clicker? All right. Now, I assume probably most people in the room will have heard of the Valentich case. Pilot disappears, for those of you who don't, pilot disappears off the coast of Victoria in 1978. His last 12 minutes of broken radio conversation with flight services at Tullamarine described at least another aircraft that was harassing him, and at most what you would call an absolute bona fide UFO event. Pilot disappears, plane disappears, one of the greatest aviation mysteries in Australia. It's never been solved, it may never be. Now, a few years ago, the Australian government released 2 files about the matter. This is the front cover of one of them. This is the Department of Transport Victoria and Tasmania Region Bureau of Air Safety Investigation accident file. Now, Bill Chalker had seen it briefly once, but other than that, no one had seen this for, I suppose, 33 years or something. So that was released now. It didn't have a lot about the actual UFO issue. It had a lot of technical detail. The other thing was that the Australian government also released, due to the work of Andrew Arnold, another file that was actually the Department of Transport's Marine Operations Centre search and rescue file. Now, we didn't even know that existed at all. So anyway, what I'm about to say today is interesting. If you know how Australia's government works, we're probably pretty lucky to have even got these two files out. Due to the amount of material that they do keep or lose or misplace, we're probably pretty lucky to get this out. I wouldn't have thought there'd be anything else in there unless there was a classified investigation done by the Royal Australian Air Force, of which there is no actual evidence that there was, but it's possible. Anyway, I can confirm today that the Australian government is holding two more files about the Frederick Valentich disappearance. They are very, very large. They were created and maintained by a very high-level government agency, and we will be seeing them come out in about 4 or 5 months. The only bad news is I wasn't the one to find them. Keith Basterfield at the moment he's a researcher in South Australia. He's resting up a lot, and he's got even more time in his hands than I do for this, and he was the one that discovered them, and he said, go ahead, announce it at the conference. So there might be some new answers. Anyway, today, and now my wife said, Paul, don't read off your notes because it looks bad. She said, don't shoot your laser pointer in people's eyes. So I'll try not to do that one, but I will have to read off my notes for this one. Now I'm going to start off with, like I said, a very, very strange case that it pushed my limits. You know, it pushed my limits about what I could accept about, I suppose, what you'll call the edge of reality. The last year, I think, what was it? It was November. I was actually looking up. I was actually on Facebook. I must have been slacking off at work. I think I was on Facebook, and I was visiting a couple of UFO group Facebook pages, which I don't usually do. I don't like them. And I came across, I think it was UFO Queensland or something, and I came across a raw report, like a lot of people put on stuff. I saw lights in the sky last night. I saw a flying saucer 20 years ago, whatever. And then I came across this one post, and I scrolled down, and it just went down and down and down and down. And I looked at it, and it was so bizarre and so almost incoherent that I thought, there's actually something to this. Hang on, I'll just have a glass of water. So what I'm actually going to do, what it was actually a couple. It was a couple, a husband and wife, you could say. They're quite private. A husband and wife in their mid-30s, in house sitting, moving around Australia house sitting. And they were staying in Bermagui, which is on the coast of New South Wales, near Bega and Eden, I think. And they claim that on the 29th, wee hours, like very early in the morning, on the 29th of May 2014, this happened to them. Now I'm going to read. It is long. It is a page or so. I'm going to read you what the female witness actually wrote, and then I had to deal with this, and this was tough. Okay, here goes. Hold on, where's that clicker? I'm fairly new to this group, and I thought I might finally be brave enough to share a close encounter my partner and I experienced one night in May earlier this year. I have to say I've never seen a UFO in my life until this night. I've always been a fence sitter. Now there is no way I can deny that A, we were visited by something out of this world, or B, we have earthly technology that is out of this world. We were on the south coast of New South Wales when this happened, in a hilly, sparsely populated area about 15 minutes from the town of Bermagui, inland. One of our favourite pastimes is to skywatch for shooting stars, and we're interested in different planets, etc. It was such a clear night with no moon, and the area is so far away from light pollution you can't get much better conditions really. Anyway, as we were sitting there around our backyard campfire in the early hours of the morning, I noticed a hazy white fog of light in the distance. I pointed it out to my partner, who also noticed it, but we just brushed it aside and kept chatting. About 2 minutes later, the fog, we thought it was a fog, became larger and more obvious. Again, we thought it was possibly the neighbours who were about 1 kilometre away, and their backlight sensor with a campfire similar to ours, so we ignored it. About another 2 minutes went past and it kept growing in size. We paid more attention to it as it was getting very strange. Then suddenly this white hue fog became a red fog. The same time it seemed to split. Instead of just this nondescript fog, a row of about 10 red and blue circular lights lined up in formation. Now this is all about half a kilometre away, so it's not that far. Where was I up to? They lined up formally with a bright white beam of light at the front. We were a bit confused as we didn't know the area as well as we would like to, and kept logically thinking of rational explanations. For example, it's a dairy farming area. We thought immediately it must be a dairy milk truck. Blah, blah, blah. But this row of white and blue and red lights suddenly compacted itself together and started making this incredibly loud noise. We estimated this thing to be about 900 metres away from us. It then scanned the terrain. This went for half an hour. It then scanned the terrain of the hills and the valley just opposite us, very low to the ground, around tree level, shining this incredibly bright light through the trees all over the ground, as it was shining the bright light in front of it. It was so bright we were able to see it effortlessly. The red and blue lights were hovering around it. Whatever it was, it looked like it was looking for something. We were not talking because it was so bizarre we were speechless. Also, it made this weird oscillating sound that terrified us, but it definitely was not a helicopter. It scanned in a grid pattern of what seemed to be consistently a speed of 80 kilometres an hour. If that wasn't enough, at the same time as all this was happening, around us became a new fog started and a new event started. These three different rhombus shapes, one green, one yellow and one red, appeared above us. They had cross-hatching effects, sort of like a laser light show, creating their shape and overlapping one another. That's there. I estimate it would have been only 10 or 20 metres above us. It was just hovering there above us, making no wind or breeze. The whole situation had gone now for over 20 minutes, and there was just nothing but a whirling maelstrom of lights and terrifying noise. We were pretty sure the noise was coming from the scanning light, coming from the scanning, but can't be 100% sure. They looked like they were working together. Anyway, the really bright light that was scanning the terrain was getting closer to us, and its spotlight was scanning in our direction. By this point, I was so scared, I thought I was going to actually have a heart attack. Then it shined its light right on us. Whatever it was, it knew we were there, and I was so scared I had to run. My partner was so terrified he couldn't move, so I had to push him and make a run for the house. His argument, he screamed, was that hiding in the house wouldn't do any good against this thing. Point taken, but I couldn't stay outside any longer. The house was 30 metres away from our backyard fire. We ran inside. It was hardly a secretive dash, but we hid behind the kitchen bench and tried to calm down. I don't know what the hell it was. The noise went away, but we didn't pluck up the courage to go out for 40 minutes. There was still some strange light activity on the other side of the hills when it's finished. We watched them for a little while and then they disappeared. It was really creepy. I'm sorry if this is long-winded, and if you got to the end, I applaud you. It still gives me heart palpitations to talk about it. The whole experience has changed my perception of everything, and we suffered post-traumatic stress syndrome disorder afterwards. I can no longer sleep with the curtains open. I'm too scared to even go to the bathroom at night. I'd love to know your thoughts, even though I'm sure not many people have ever experienced anything like this. Could it be military? It's a bit bloody rude for them to go around and scare people like this. So anyway, I read this and I thought, this is beyond me. I thought, no. So I emailed them. I Facebook message, all that stuff. And they were very reluctant. It turns out that the female witness actually has a very public job with children to top it off. So neither of them want any of this coming out, but I thought I'll handle this as you would any investigation. You start asking questions. You start thinking about IFOs, identified flying objects. What could all this be? It turns out in the end I was absolutely convinced that nothing could explain this other than something UFO-y, paranormally. But anyway, you have to do the groundwork. So I actually worked a bit with Keith Basterfield and another guy who doesn't want to be named on this. It took over 28 days. I've got here, I counted these up, it was 14 emails comprising of 36 questions, 3 hours on the phone with another approximately 50 questions. And then I met them for lunch in Essendon North one day to go through the whole thing again on paper. And then we started looking at what it could have been. Helicopters. They were out there for so long before this started that would have required, say it was a Coast Watch helicopter, Royal Australian Navy, Federal Police, that would have required a helicopter, functioning, fully operational crew, sitting outside there for 4 hours in the valley, doing absolutely nothing, then turn on blue and red lights and somehow produce a Hollywood fog, then start scanning the landscape. Now, I spoke to a very senior police officer and I said, look, would a New South Wales police helicopter or any helicopter, government helicopter, hang around in milk dairy countryside and then behave like this? Not to mention, doesn't even include what was going on up there above them, but I said to a cop, I said, you know, do they just sit around doing anything like this? I mean, is it even remotely possible? And he said those things are $15,000 an hour for taxpayers at best, at like minimum. And he said that there is absolutely, it is inconceivable that would have been a helicopter. So that ruled that out. We looked at everything. We looked at the humidity. We looked at astronomical data. Most of it didn't even apply. Nothing about what I just read you then can be put down to the movement of planets, to a passing light aircraft. One thing we did look at with all this business, these three shapes that were above them, could that have been Aurora Australis, so Southern Lights? And I got onto an astronomer, and he said that in southern New South Wales, that Southern Lights, even at the best of times, are so weak and just creamy, just a slight yellow. They just don't switch on and off with geometric shapes of multiple colours. And he said the other thing is, if that did actually happen, the whole country would know about it, would be in the papers all the next day. This was a very local event, and we came to the conclusion that it did actually happen. And I hate to admit it, but I cannot explain any of it, and it's really affected them. So anyway, I mentioned before the term IFO, which is Identified Flying Objects. When you want to investigate the UFO phenomenon, the one thing to me personally that's absolutely non-negotiable is you have to figure out, before someone, it amazes me that people come to me or anyone and they say, I saw something last night, I've never seen anything like it, I have no idea what it was, but I can tell you it was an alien spacecraft. It doesn't make sense. They say, I have no idea what it was, but I can tell you it was an alien spacecraft. So anyway, aside from that, what you've first got to do is you've got to understand what flies, what hovers, what appears on film, lens flares, etc. And there is so much stuff at ground level. Fixed wing aircraft, helicopters of every different shape and size, balloons, fireworks, flocks of birds, insects, meteorites, satellites passing overhead. Even there's been cases where people have seen UFOs when all it's probably been is high like transmission lines, power lines that people can't see because they're just a bit small, but they're reflecting some light. Once you can honestly discard all the IFOs, the identified flying objects in a UFO case, then you might have something unusual. Now, the one guy who sums it up best would probably be this guy. Alan Hendry was an American. He was an astronomer. He had a BA. He had a degree in astronomy, and he did something that that no one else quite did it like this. He spent 16 months with a budget, adequate technical apparatus, phone lines, stationery. He studied full-time, more than full-time, just over 1,300 American UFO cases. He came to the conclusion that, and he wasn't a debunker, he wasn't a skeptic, he wasn't out to ridicule, he was actually very open-minded. He came to the conclusion that thereabouts 98% of UFO cases absolutely can be explained by misidentifications of aircraft, misidentifications of astronomical bodies, etc. It's just the way it is. Skeptics love him because he's able to explain almost every UFO case he touched, and UFO researchers love him because he does it so well, and he still left room for a residual number of UFO cases that didn't align to anything. They didn't have mundane causes. They didn't even have combinations of mundane causes. So you get a open-minded professional like that who can end up writing a 400-page book about it. Basically, I suppose what I'm trying to say is, if you aren't solving, as an investigator, if you aren't solving 95+% of your UFO cases, then you are not doing a good enough job. So anyway, now just on IFOs, the next case I'm going to talk about, IFO becomes unbelievably important because this one could have killed 50 or 100 people. Just first, all right, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau. Australian Transport Safety Bureau are, how would I explain this? They're our cops of the transport industry, marine, rail and aviation. So they investigate safety issues, they investigate crashes, they investigate stuff that slams into each other on airport runways, they investigate pilots who are high on methamphetamine when they're flying. That's what they do. And they actually have a database. You can actually go to the ATSB database and look at every current safety or incident-related transport issue in the country right now. You can go straight to it. You click on aviation because we're not interested in rail and marine. You click on aviation. I do this every now and again. And last April, I clicked on aviation and I went to the database and I typed in keywords. Now, I typed in all my typical ones, UFO, unknown, unusual. When you get desperate, you start trying flying saucer, whatever. And anyway, I got a hit. Suddenly I got a hit, and this big square of information comes up. And it was a really recent event in Perth. And for all intents and purposes, here we have dead set, no one had picked it up, a dead set UFO case. Well, it turned out to be probably not, but on face value, what I had presented in front of me was a UFO case. And just before I forget, this, just for anyone that's interested, this is an ATSB aviation accident and incident notification form. It's well, in this case, the pilot of the plane would have actually had to fill out and send it off electronically to the ATSB when reporting it, and it's that area there that he would have written most of his goodies out. So anyway, I'll read you what this block of information said on the screen. It said, the ATSB has commenced an investigation into the near collision with an unknown object involving a de Havilland DH-8 near Perth Airport, Western Australia, on the 19th of March 2014. While passing 4,000 feet on descent, the crew observed an unknown object tracking directly towards the aircraft. The crew manoeuvred the aircraft to maintain separation. They actually had to swerve around this, right? As part of the investigation, the ATSB will interview the air crew. The report will be released within several months. So the first thing I did, I waited till business day. I was slacking off at work again, I think. And I rang the ATSB and I said, I just quoted the reference number and I said I want to be put onto the strategic manager of investigations. And I was put through to some pen pusher, some pen sucker. So I said, I want to discuss this case with you. He said, we can't do it. You're a civilian, we can't do it. You're not part of the airline. You're not the pilot. You're not from CASA or the Defence Department, can't do it. So I said, I'll start my own investigation. How's them apples? So anyway, I think I rang Keith Basterfield and a couple of pilots that I know, and I said, how do we go about this? And so what we did, I'll just tell you the thing. Anyway, first we secured secondary radar data on the event. We were able to work out that morning, it was 9 o'clock, though that's the other thing, this all happened, this plane was pulling into Perth Airport, flying east, but curving into Perth Airport He was descending. It was 9 in the morning, and something's come up at him, like I said. And so first we secured secondary radar data so we could work out every single aircraft that was actually up there. We wanted to work out if maybe it was a plane and both him and the co-pilot had completely misseen it. Anyway, there was no plane up there. We secured primary radar data, which shows everything that's up there: plane, missile, drone, even other stuff. And it turns out there was nothing shown on primary radar, so this object must have been very small, not to be picked up by Pearce Air Force Base or Perth Airport's primary radar. We looked at the weather details, perfectly lovely day. We checked previous ATSB, Australian Transport Safety Bureau, reports involving drones or unmanned aerial vehicles. See, at this point we thought it was probably a drone, an unmanned aerial vehicle. The problem is, the pilot had the key part here was to actually interview the pilot himself. Now that's tough. We know the airline, Skipper's Aviation, we know what date it happened, blah, blah, blah. But so what I did, I decided to ring the airline. I thought I've got one chance at this. So I rang the airline and I said, I want to talk to the chief safety officer. Got put through. And I said, I'm an aviation researcher. You don't ring and say I'm a UFO researcher. Okay, you're always an aviation researcher, right? Or an astronomer, right? So I rang and I said, I'm an aviation researcher. And I said, you've had a near miss. One of your pilots had to swerve around. And he said, yeah, we know the case. It's really serious. And I said, I'm an aviation researcher. Can I talk to the pilot? And he said, no. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, because it's an internal matter. And I said, it's not internal. It's on the ATSB's website. It's public, right? And I said, anyway, he said, look, I suppose I could put it to the board of directors, and I suppose I could talk to the pilot. Anyway, 3 days later, I couldn't believe it, got an email, pilot's phone number. Yes, you can talk to the pilot. So that night, ring him. And this is what he said happened. He said he's flying along, co-pilot's there, he's in control. He said this plane's particularly good at looking down through like you don't have to look up too much. He said they were descending anyway, and they were going actually at he thought around about 450 kilometres an hour. And he said first he saw this bright strobe light just flashing, and then he said, I don't believe it, it's connected to something like a missile, right? And he said it's literally coming straight towards the plane. He's got 53 people on board. So what he did, he just swerved like that, and this thing went past him 100 metres at the most out that side and only 20 metres vertical. So it went right past him like that. And I asked him, look, I must have asked him 60, 70 questions. He was in complete shock. So was the co-pilot. Air Services Australia, they confirmed that no other flight crews reported this, so it was quite a local event to his plane. He honestly did think he was going to collide with it. He said it was like a cigarette, like about the dimensions of a pencil or a cigarette, with a strobe light on the front. And this is the worrying part. He said it was military green. So I'm starting to think maybe it's a surface-to-air missile. It had a strobe light on the front. It was flashing every second at least. As soon as he landed, he took a voluntary drug and urine test. I said, one of the questions I said, did anyone tell you not to discuss it? And he said no. Anyway, so we waited. I started writing the report, like a full report, and I started thinking it's either a rocket or a missile, or like a high-end toy rocket or missile. Or I thought this might be like a drone, and I started ringing drone companies, and I said, you got any drones that are one colour, strobe lights on the front, and like a cigarette, and fly up to 4,000 feet? And they said, absolutely no way. Nothing like that can be imported into Australia. Absolutely no way. They don't exist. Drones are ugly things with helicopter and advertising all over them, multiple colours, landing gear, cameras, this sort of thing, and they don't fly at high speeds. So anyway, Keith and I released our final report, and we decided that yes, it was still an unknown. We don't know what it was. We don't know what launched it, who launched it. The ATSB released their final report, and it was 4 pages long. This is the disgusting part, right? It was 4 pages long. 3 pages were legal jargon. The 1 page that was about the case was no better than, well, this is it. I'll read it to you. On 19th of March 2014, at about 9:13 Western Standard Time, a de Havilland DHC-8 was on approach to Perth Airport from Kambalda, Western Australia, when about 23 kilometres north-northeast of Perth, about 3,800 feet above mean sea level, the crew sighted a bright strobe light in front of the aircraft. The light appeared to track towards the aircraft, and the crew realised that the light was on an unknown object, possibly an unmanned aerial vehicle. The pilot took evasive action, turning towards the west to avoid collision with the object. The object passed about 20 metres horizontally and 100 metres vertically from the aircraft. The pilot reported that the object was cylindrical in shape and grey in colour. He said to me green on the phone, but this says grey. It was at about 3,700 above in controlled airspace. The crew did not receive a traffic collision warning. The airspace below 3,500 is military restricted airspace, and was not operating UAVs or was not aware of anyone operating UAVs at the time. The ATSB was not able to confirm the details of the object or identify any UAV operator in the area at the time. And it just worries me that this, if this is the, with a case like this, that probably was man-made, if this is the best they can do, then when they get a real UFO case, they must botch that entirely. And so that's why, that's one of the reasons I'm highlighting this is because it is important to have civilian researchers, because the government, at this level at least, are doing an absolutely horrible job of it. Now I'm going to tell you, oh, that's right, just as a postscript, we found out a few months later that in 2013, so a year before, there was another similar incident. A plane, same airline, same time of day, same location, was pulling into Perth, this time at 6,000 or 7,000 feet though, and he went past a rocket. He said it was a rocket on a parachute. Someone had launched a rocket towards the plane, it had burst, and it was coming down on a parachute. 2 incidences in Perth in the space of a year, weekdays, same time of day, same airline. And the ATSB and Air Services Australia didn't even connect the events. I connected them easily. Keith Basterfield did, everyone else did, but the authorities can't seem to do it. Now either that's a cover-up or it's incompetence. Either way, your taxpayers are paying it. Your dollars are paying for it. Now this one, the next one, by the way, that's the plane that nearly got hit. Now, this is good. A case straight from government files. Now this is a bit more mysterious. I don't know how many of you know about the Freedom of Information Act. It's an act of Parliament that says that civilians can essentially write a letter to any government agency, any government department, unit, bureau, and ask for files, documents, audio-visual stuff on any topic within reason. You wouldn't just write, I request every single file you've got on planes. Like, you know, they'd knock it back. But you can, if you can roughly narrow down the types of documents you want with a date range and so on, you can ask any government agency for documents. And if they are classified, they may black half of them out or deny you altogether. But FOIs are very, very. A lot of these scandals that come out in the media are actually journalists who are obtaining information from government departments under the FOI Act, and that's what I've used a lot. You've got to know what you're doing, but it can be learnt. I learnt how to use the FOI Act in about 12 months. One of the FOIs I did now, before I was talking about the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, another organisation that controls what's supposed to be going on in our airspace is Air Services Australia. They provide, well, their website says they are a government-owned corporation providing safe, secure and efficient, environmentally responsible services to the aviation industry. Now last year, thought, well, there's two, I knew that there was 2 ways that a pilot in this country could report a UFO. One is the form I showed you before to the ATSB. The other one is something called an ESIR, which is Electronically Submitted Incident Report. And that goes to Air Services Australia. And I sent them an FOI request 8 months ago, and I said, I want you to search all your ESIR databases going back, but I picked a date range around 1999, 2000, and I said, I want you to search for the words in all your databases, ESIR databases, that have been submitted by pilots or flight crews. I want you to search for the word unknown, unusual, UFO, object, bright light, luminous lights, fast moving, etc. And a couple of months later, they said, okay, we've finished your request. We've got 1-page document. And the middle one really jumped out at me. Turns out that back in 1999, at 10:15, that's in London, so Universal Standard Time, that happens to be 7:15 at night in Australia, or at least in the Northern Territory. So 7:15 at night in the Northern Territory, TOPS means Northern Territory, 7:15 at night, the executive summary states, pilots of AJP and AJK en route for Alice Springs sighted an unidentified green object in their vicinity. No details of any other traffic held by Brisbane Sector 11. In the description part, at 10:15, that's London time, but so 7:15 at night, the pilot of AJP Tyndall for Alice Springs reported sighting a green object climbing and descending vertically and paralleling his track for some time. The pilot of AJK Darwin for Alice Springs reported sighting this green object as well. No details of any other traffic were held by Brisbane Sector 11. Now that's pretty interesting for a number of reasons. Brisbane Sector 11, Brisbane controls airspace in the Northern Territory. Now what this means is AJP is the registration of the aircraft, and the word after it, Tyndall, means it left Katherine Airport. Now AJK Darwin is a registration of another of the other aircraft, and it left Darwin. Both were going to Alice Springs. What had actually happened was they were flying right near each other. We've worked this out. They're flying near each other. One had taken off from Darwin and reached cruising altitude. The other one had taken off from Katherine, Tyndall, and reached cruising altitude, and they're next to each other, heading south for Alice Springs. Now, saying here, Brisbane National Operations Control Centre has got no other aircraft up there. There should be no other aircraft up there. Even military aircraft, it's not a time of war. We're not in rules of engagement. Even military aircraft should have transponders on and not be radio silent, so it probably wasn't military. This is, to read between the lines, something green, being at night time or just after sunset, we presume glowing, probably quite brightly. Something has been dipping, so they've got two planes. Something's dipping up and down in the atmosphere, then it tracks with one of the aircraft. I mean, it attaches itself, like we'll say, I don't know, it could have been 5 k's off its wingtip, could have been 2 metres, I don't know. But the other aircraft saw it. See, when you've got a plane and a pilot case, it's good, but when you've got a case where there's 2 planes with 2 flight crews seeing the same thing, that's very hard to brush aside. What's also interesting about this is, I thought, could it have been a misrepresentation of the planet Venus? Were they seeing Venus under very unusual lighting conditions, or had they not slept for 36 hours, or had both planes mucking around? Anyway, I found out about, I did some research, and I found out about these 2 planes themselves, and normally you wouldn't think that would matter so much, but in this case it's very important. AJP and AJK were both registered in 1999 to an airline called Pell Air. And at that time, both planes, their job was to ferry money, cash, gold, title deeds, bank cheques for the Reserve Bank of Australia and for the big 4 banks from Darwin and Katherine to Alice Springs and then on to the major capital cities. Now, why is this important? I spoke to someone in the aviation industry, and he said to me, there is absolutely no way that Pal Air and the Reserve Bank and the banks would be employing 4 dummy pilots across 2 planes to get into that role, to be flying these sort of jets, and these are West Wind jets manufactured by Israeli aircraft industries, top speed just under 1,000 kilometres an hour, ceiling height of 41,000 feet. My guy said to me, there is absolutely no way that these pilots would be anything but of the highest calibre. He said they could be ex-combat pilots, but they'd be at least 35 or 40 years old. They'd probably have 15,000 hours flying experience behind them. So that leads me to believe that this event was not Venus or Jupiter or something else. I mean, I don't know. The problem is, this is a hard one to investigate because it's quite old. I've even tried to get onto Pal Air, who doesn't exist anymore. They were overtaken by other companies, and to see if they're still holding records, but I haven't had much luck. Now, where's that? Just in case, I mean, I found this. I'm not saying that this is what it looked like, but both planes saw a green object. Must have been glowing because it was night time, and you can see the gravity. If you're a pilot and you look out the cockpit and see something like that, might have been smaller, I don't know. It certainly leaves an impression. Okay. Another one. Now, I don't expect you to be able to read that, but I was talking before about essentially a UFO case over Perth where a plane nearly got hit. Here's another one. I got this one out of the ATSB again. It's saying here that it was 26th of April 2005. It was 0956 hours local time, New South Wales, near Mount Sandon. It was a beach aircraft operated by the Royal Flying Doctor Service that had taken off. It was altitude 20,000 feet. And it says, 4 nautical miles north of Mount Sandon, the pilot of, redacted, you can't read that part, thought they saw traffic below them coming towards them. They commenced a turn to the right to avoid the object, then turned back to the left to see behind and attempt to identify what it was. The pilot subsequently reported that it was a red and white object travelling very fast but could not be identified for certain as an aircraft. There was no other known traffic on the ATS system within 12 nautical miles of the aircraft, and there was no cloud. The sun at the time was high, and to the rear of left of the direction of travel. Air situation playback confirmed there was no other mode C returns. That means there was no other planes up there. The object passed at an estimated distance of less than 500 feet below the aircraft. So once again, we have a near miss. This one, though, is at 20,000 feet. Now, either it was a misidentified plane that was travelling illegally. I find pretty unlikely that that was the case. Now, this is back in 2005. People weren't talking about drones and UAVs back then, especially at 20,000 feet. Most drones back then were playthings, operated by little battery-powered remote controls. It could have been a drone, or it could have been a bona fide UFO event. Again, we just don't know. And the reason why I'm telling you all this is because, certainly at this level, the Australian government are not taking these events seriously enough. I mean, these near misses, I reckon for every one that we know about, there could be 10 that we don't. And whether they are bona fide UFOs, i.e. from somewhere else, whether they are drones and missiles and so on, either way, it's not good enough. But right now, it's left up to people like us to be bringing this to the fore, because this sort of stuff's not making it to the newspapers. And I suppose that when something really amazing does happen over Australia one day, the authorities are going to be scrambling, and they're only going to have themselves to blame. Like, a real UFO event is, in my opinion, quite rare. But the UFO phenomenon is so odd and it's so random that I expect that, like within the next 20 years, we're going to have an incredibly major event over Australia, and I hope I'm there to be part of it. Right. Okay, now the big question. this is what everyone asks me. Are the Royal Australian Air Force, or the Department of Defence generally, are they covering up the UFO matter? Is there a cover-up? Aliens, whatever. I don't believe at these low levels, like transport incidents, safety incidences, I don't believe that there's a cover-up here. I certainly don't believe that, say, the Department of Defence is infiltrating themselves into UFO groups or monitoring UFO researchers' emails or whatever. However, anyone that knows a lot about the history of the UFO phenomenon will know that there has been probably a good 1,500 what we call radar visual cases, RVs, radar visual cases, where you've got a ground control radar, like an air defence radar or an approach control radar that's picking up, air traffic controllers are picking up a UFO near a plane. Then you've got a plane who's saying, I've got something out here in front of me, and the air traffic controllers are saying, yeah, we can see it, what is it? And the pilot says it looks like a rugby ball on its side and it's glowing purple, right? And then the air traffic control says, well, can't you get in for a better inspection? Submit a report when you get down. We're going to have to classify it secret. Send it to NORAD, whatever. The radar visual cases in Australia must occur because they've occurred all around the rest of the world, and this is the form that the Royal Australian Air Force would use to handle such an event. Now, Royal Australian Air Force is divided up into 7 force element groups. One of them is called Surveillance and Response Group, based in South Australia, and it has 4 wings. One of them is called 41 Wing. Its job is to watch the air corridors, air routes above the Indian Ocean, Indonesia, the Coral Sea, New Guinea, right out to New Caledonia. It's got other radar systems that operate around Royal Australian Air Force and Royal Australian Navy bases. And it took me 6 months to get this, but I got this document. It's actually a 6-page document, but this is the most important page. If a UFO event actually happened in Australia on radar, I mean, if the Joint Battle Space Controls at Willemtown Air Force Base actually had an object zooming around, I suspect it has happened, it certainly happened in the United States, if they were to have an object on the screen or a formation of many objects, zipping around doing, hairpin turns at sort of 4,000 kilometres an hour, this is the document they'd be pulling out. It's actually called contacts. It's a standing instruction called contacts of interest. Anyway, this is the important part. First, they have to work out what time the radar system first saw the UFO. This part here, I'm not allowed to see. They actually redacted this when they sent this to me. They took that out. They have a computer system that they can enter in or track file or keep the detection heading, like what direction it's going, the exact speed, what time it disappears, another way of writing what time it disappears, faded speed, approximate average speed of the track, blah, 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 blah. Now, I've got hold of this, and I straight away I FOI'd, Freedom of Information requested the Royal Australian Air Force, and I said I want to see cases where you've picked up a contact of interest and referred to these pages, and had to send the information to higher authorities like Australian Joint Forces, Minister of Defence, Coast Watch, etc. And they wrote back to me and they say, look, we pick up contacts of interest quite often. Now, I do know most of them are drug smuggling aircraft from Papua New Guinea, and they are planes without their transponders turned on that happen to get into radar coverage around the bases and so on. But we know from one of my main jobs this next 6 months, I want to be able to say to the Royal Australian Air Force somehow, I want to see a database of, say, 5 years worth of contacts of interest with all the data. What manoeuvring the objects made, if they pissed off into space, if they came from space, if they landed or got very close to the ground at least. That's going to be one big task, and that could be the smoking gun for Australia. If they, under the Freedom of Information Act, they have to provide a fairly consistent and quality amount of data. They don't have to produce everything for you because it is national security, especially something like air defence. But if one of my goals is to somehow get a list or a inventory of cases where UFOs have been picked up by 41 Wing, and if we can prove on these billion-dollar systems that they have, then that's going to be absolute gold. That would be that really would be a smoking gun. I hope to do it soon, and just for my last slide. So anyway, now you know how I investigate. It's a bit different. Most people run around out in the field, talk to witnesses, a bit of cup of tea, whatever. That's great, but I like doing it this way because no one else is doing it, and it is quite hard. It can be quite expensive. Just for my last slide, most people think UFOs, people see them every now and again. As I was just saying, I suspect that the first place in Australia where a really serious UFO event would occur or would be seen to occur, this is the only photo you'll ever see inside Willemtown Air Force Base Data Fusion Centre, Air Operations and Space Control Building. That's it. That photo shows the men and women who would be the first ones who would be sweating over a UFO. A joyrider right above Australia. It's the only photo you'll ever see inside that building. I don't know how it came out, but I got a hold of it and no one else did. All right, so that's my speech.